If you had to choose between honor and love, which would you choose? I've come to learn that out here, where the wind carves through canyons and silence weighs heavier than gold. Choices like that don't wait politely. They come at you like a snowstorm, sudden, blinding, and cold. Claire Beaumont stepped off that rickety stagecoach with nothing but a stitched-together satchel, and the last letter he ever sent. Widow Creek wasn't a town so much as a cluster of stubborn buildings leaning against the wind, like they were too proud to fall. Snow clung to the eaves of the saloon. The general store's windows were fogged with frost. There was no welcome party, just the driver coughing up dust and two drunk men arguing over poker. She stood there, her boots sinking in mud and slush, looking for the man who said he'd be there. J. Thomas Whitaker, a farmer, 32, widowed, no children, looking for a God-fearing woman to share a quiet life under the Lord's sky. That's what his letter had said. That's what gave her the strength to leave Missouri. What he didn't mention was that he might not show up at all. She waited until sundown. No one came. No one knew his name. No one had heard of a Mr. Whitaker. A lesser woman might have cried. Claire didn't. She was raised to endure. Born in the cotton fields of Franklin County, taught by hardship and the kind of silence that crawls in through the window when a man drinks too much and a mother has no words left to shield her daughter. So she stood there, breath fogging in the air, staring down the last of her hope as the stagecoach pulled away. That was when someone finally spoke to her. A boy no older than 12, chewing on a stick and wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big. "You looking for someone?" She nodded. "Mr. Whitaker, he was supposed to meet me here." The boy shrugged. "Ain't no Whitaker round these parts." Then he tilted his head westward. "Only man lives out that way is the trapper. But he don't like people." Claire's eyes followed the path the boy pointed at. It was barely more than a trail disappearing into the tree line, swallowed by snow and shadow. Some would have turned back, headed south, maybe found work scrubbing floors or teaching children to read. But Claire didn't leave everything behind to return to what she already knew. She pulled her coat tighter, held her head high, and walked toward the trees. The forest was quiet, unnervingly so. No birdsong, no rustling deer, just her boots crunching through half-frozen snow. The sun had dipped behind the hills by the time she saw smoke trailing above the treetops, the weak orange glow of firelight spilling from a crooked cabin tucked against a cliff. She hesitated at the edge of the clearing. There was no sign of movement, no dog barking, no welcome, just silence and that flicker of warmth, like a secret too proud to die. Then the door opened. He stood there, tall, rough-bearded, coat patched with fur and age. His eyes met hers, gray, unreadable, and for a moment neither of them moved. Claire felt her heart leap toward something it didn't understand yet. Not desire, not fear, just gravity. "You lost?" he asked, voice rough as the bark of pine. "I'm looking for shelter," she replied. "Just for the night." He didn't nod, didn't invite her in, just stared. Then, wordless, he stepped aside. Inside was warmer than she expected. The fire crackled low, casting flickers against the stone walls. There was a rifle by the door, a kettle steaming gently over the flames, a single cot unmade. Everything smelled of smoke, pine, and loneliness. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. Instead, he handed her a cup of water and sat in the corner, watching the flames like they owed him answers. Claire didn't sleep that night, not really. She lay by the hearth, curled in her coat, listening to the wind groan through the cracks in the walls. and him. She listened to him breathe. Heavy, steady, like a man who hadn't trusted another soul in years. There was something about him, something wounded and sharp beneath the silence. And in that first night at Widow Creek, Claire realized something strange. Sometimes the ones who don't speak are the ones who have the most to hide. And sometimes the worst place to leave your heart is with a man who has nothing left to lose. If you had to choose between the safety of silence and the danger of being seen, truly seen, what would you choose? Some folks crave noise, chatter, movement, the hum of town life or the music of voices circling a supper table. But Claire had spent most of her life wrapped in silence that didn't comfort. It cut. And yet, nothing prepared her for the kind that lived in that cabin. The man hadn't said a word to her since offering that tin cup of water the night before. When she woke in the morning, stiff and cold, he was already gone. The fire was low, but not dead. A small loaf of cornbread and a knife sat beside the hearth. No note, no tracks, just the quiet. She could have left then, walked back into town, asked around, pleaded, but she didn't. Something about that place, about him, it held her like a story left unfinished. So she stayed. She swept the floors, stoked the fire, used water from the creek to wash her face, her hands, her heart. It had been years since anyone had let her rest without questions, without judgment, without reaching for something. That morning in the cabin felt more like sanctuary than any chapel she'd ever sat in. He returned just before dusk. A deer slung over his back, blood staining the front of his coat. Still, he said nothing. Claire opened the door for him. He nodded once, barely, and dragged the carcass to the chopping block outside. By the time he stepped back in, his face and arms scrubbed raw by creek water, the stew pot was already simmering over the fire. He looked at it, then at her. Their eyes locked, not long, but long enough for something unspoken to pass between them. He sat at the table. So did she, and for the first time in a long time, Claire shared a meal with someone who expected nothing in return. "Your name?" she asked, gently, breaking the silence as she passed him a tin spoon. He hesitated, then, "Elias." No last name, no smile, just that one word, scratched out like it hadn't been said in years. She nodded. "Claire." They didn't speak more than that, not that night. But the silence between them began to change. It softened, warmed, became something almost sacred. For 3 days, that rhythm held. Elias would disappear at dawn, returning by nightfall with fresh kills or firewood. Claire kept the hearth alive, cleaned what little there was to clean, mended an old quilt she found folded in a trunk. Each night, they sat together at that rough-hewn table, spooning stew or venison into their mouths without much more than glances exchanged. But oh, those glances! There's a kind of looking that feels like touching, like a confession wrapped in silence. Elias had a way of watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, quiet, thoughtful, almost afraid. And Claire felt herself unraveling in his presence, piece by piece. He never asked about Missouri, never asked why a woman like her had traveled west alone. But one night, after the fire had burned low and their supper sat untouched on the table, he spoke. "You ain't just passing through." It wasn't a question. It was a knowing. Claire stared at the flames. Her voice, when it came, cracked at the edges. "No," she told him then about the letter, the promise, the name that meant nothing in this town, about stepping off the coach and realizing she'd been abandoned. Again. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask why she didn't leave. He just said, "I don't like company." "I figured," she said softly. He looked at her, really looked. "But you ain't company." That silence returned, but this time it pulsed with something electric, something forbidden, something aching to be more. Claire turned her face away, afraid he'd see what lived behind her eyes, because it wasn't just survival anymore. Not just warmth or shelter or kindness. It was longing for a man who lived like a ghost, for a place that shouldn't feel like home, but did. That night, sleep didn't come easy. She lay near the fire, wrapped in the quilt, listening to the storm clawing at the windows. But it wasn't the wind that kept her awake. It was Elias, and the way his presence stirred something buried, something dangerous. Because the heart can't read laws, doesn't care for proper introductions or the rules written by fathers and townsfolk. It just knows what it needs, and what Claire needed was beginning to sit across from her each night with blood on his coat and firelight in his eyes. If you had to choose between protecting someone you love and protecting the truth about who you are, which would you choose? Some truths are heavier than a bullet, some lies kinder than the truth. Elias never said much, but the silence around him began to sound like a story too dangerous to tell. Claire could feel it, between the pauses in their conversations, in the way his eyes scanned the tree line each morning, in the tightness of his jaw when she asked where he went. She never asked much, didn't want to scare it away, whatever fragile thing was blooming between them. But love, even the forbidden kind, especially the forbidden kind, it asks questions eventually. It was the 3rd week since she arrived, maybe the 4th. Time moved slower in the cold. That day, the snow had fallen heavy, thick enough to muffle the world. Elias hadn't gone out. He sat in his usual chair by the fire, sharpening a knife without looking up. Claire sat across from him, mending one of his torn shirts, pretending not to notice how his hands trembled just slightly as he worked. He stopped suddenly. "Don't go in the storage room." It was the first full sentence he'd offered all day. Claire glanced up, needle paused mid-stitch. Why not? He didn't answer, just returned to his blade. That night, when he stepped out to smoke, he always smoked in the dark, away from her eyes. She stood before the little door at the back of the cabin. It creaked when she opened it. Dust swirled in the beam of moonlight. Crates, a busted rocking chair, old hunting gear, and under a moth-eaten canvas tarp, a box. She lifted the lid and found the things men bury when they don't want to be found. A revolver, clean, oiled, initials carved into the handle, E.R., a wanted poster, yellowed but legible. The sketch, it was him, Elias Rayner, armed and dangerous, wanted for the murder of Deputy Marshal Thomas Kellen, $500 reward, dead or alive. Her hand trembled as she folded it. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just closed the lid and sat there in the dark, heart pounding in her chest like a caged animal. When she finally emerged, he was back at the fire. He knew. She saw it in his eyes. Claire sat across from him without speaking. The space between them crackled like the wood burning behind them. "I didn't kill that man," he said at last. His voice was quiet, like he was telling a ghost to go back to sleep. Claire said nothing. Elias stared at the fire, the reflection dancing in his gray eyes. "I was there, though. My brother, Jude, he did it. Stupid fight, whiskey, a card game gone wrong. I tried to stop him, but—" His throat tightened. "I took the fall. Jude had a wife, a newborn girl. I was already nothing. No home, no name worth keeping. So I ran. Let them think it was me." Claire's hands rested in her lap, stiff with the weight of what she now carried. "And now?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked. "I thought if I came far enough, stayed quiet long enough, Maybe I'd stop feeling like a man who should be dead. The room fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't cold. It was blistering. Claire's heart pulled two ways. She had known pain, known abandonment, known men who lied with their mouths and others who lied with their silence. But Elias, he hadn't lied to her. Not really. He'd just tried to disappear. And somehow, she'd found him. She stood. He flinched, as if bracing for her to leave. Instead, she crossed the room and sat beside him on the floor. The fire lit their faces, but the rest of the world disappeared. Her fingers brushed his. "I don't care what the world calls you," she said. "I know the kind of man you are." His hand tightened around hers. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was something more dangerous. It was permission, the kind of permission that could damn them both. Love, when it's forbidden, doesn't whisper. It howls. But out there in the snow-covered woods, where the laws of man faded with the wind, two people dared to find warmth in each other's arms, even if it meant betrayal, even if it meant blood. Because sometimes love isn't about safety. It's about choosing the fire, even when you know it might burn everything down. If you had to walk away from the only love you've ever known, just to protect it, could you do it? Some choices don't come with time. They come with the sound of hooves on frozen ground, with the sharp knock of a fist on a wooden door, with eyes that see too much, and mouths that report back to the wrong kind of men. The sky was brittle that morning, pale blue like the world hadn't woken up yet. Claire stood outside the cabin with a basket of kindling in her arms when she heard it. Riders, two of them, coming up the hill with the kind of pace that said they weren't in a hurry, but weren't about to stop either. Elias was already behind her before she could speak. He didn't say a word, just stepped past her, rifle in hand, and watched them come. They were bounty men. You could smell it before they spoke. That mix of sweat, leather, and the kind of arrogance only men who chase death for money carry around like a second skin. The taller one tipped his hat. "Mornin'. We're looking for someone might have come through these parts. Elias Rayner. You heard that name?" Claire felt her breath lodge somewhere between her heart and her throat. Elias didn't blink. "Haven't seen him." "Strange," the other said, dismounting. "Fella at the saloon in town said someone built a fire out here not long ago, and he swears you ain't a local." Claire stepped forward then. "This is my husband's land." Both men turned. Their eyes crawled over her like a stain. "You don't look like you're from around here either, miss." "I'm not," she said, "but I belong here." The taller man smirked. Funny thing about belonging. It tends to change once the law gets involved. There it was, that moment when the world teeters, when the breath before the fall feels longer than life itself. They didn't push harder. Not then. Just nodded, left a flyer on the porch, and rode off with dust in their wake and suspicion in their saddlebags. But it was enough to stir the ghosts again. Inside, Elias paced. "I have to go," he said. "No, they'll come back, with more. I don't care." "I do." His voice cracked on that last word, not from fear, from something worse. Resolve. He turned to her, eyes wet but unyielding. "Claire, I've lived the last 6 years with nothing but regret. I thought maybe I'd outrun it, that I could hide it deep enough that it would stop following me. But it doesn't work that way." "You're not him," she whispered. "You didn't kill that man." "They don't care." She reached for him, held his face in her hands. "I care." For a moment, he let himself lean into that touch. Let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, love could be louder than the sound of hooves on a frozen trail. Then he pulled away. "I won't let them hurt you for me." Claire shook her head, tears stinging. "Then don't leave. Stay and fight. I already lost that fight. Years ago. Now I run. And this time, I run alone." She stood in the doorway as he packed. Didn't scream. Didn't beg. Just watched him slide the revolver into his belt, wrap the scarf she'd mended around his throat, and close the door behind him. He didn't look back, and maybe that was the part that broke her most. That night, the wind howled louder than it had all winter. Claire sat by the fire, staring at the empty chair across from her, the wanted poster still resting on the table. The silence wasn't sacred anymore. It was a grave. Because love, real love, isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go before the world rips it from your hands anyway. And yet, even as she sat there alone, even as the snow piled high against the windows and the shadows danced across the walls, she believed he'd come back, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. Because some promises don't need words. They're carved in the space between a breath and a goodbye. And in that quiet, Claire whispered the only thing she could. "I'll wait." If you had to risk everything, your name, your freedom, your very life, for one last chance to hold the person you love, would you take that step? The dawn came slow that morning. The light dragged across the sky like it had forgotten how to rise. Claire hadn't slept. She sat in Elias's chair, wrapped in his coat, the scent of him clinging to the seams like a ghost that refused to let go. Every creak in the cabin felt louder. Every gust of wind outside sounded like a voice about to knock, but no one came. Not Elias, not the riders, just silence and the ache that filled it. Claire moved like a woman half dead. She boiled water out of habit, folded his blanket, cleaned his knife, touched the table where his fingers had rested. It had only been a day, one day. But the cabin already felt hollow without him, and still, she waited. She waited because something in her gut said he wasn't finished. That men like Elias don't vanish like smoke. They disappear like thunder, loud, hard, and always promising to return with rain. That night, the wind turned, and with it came the sound of hooves. But it wasn't Elias. 3 riders, faces covered, guns drawn. They didn't knock. They broke the door down. Claire screamed, more from fury than fear, and scrambled for the fire iron. But they were quicker. Rough hands dragged her outside into the snow, hair tangled, breath ragged. One of them shoved the poster in her face. "You know where he is. Don't lie." Her voice cracked. "He's gone." "Gone where?" "I don't know." A slap tore through the cold. She hit the ground hard, cheek burning. "Try again," the taller one growled, cocking his revolver. Claire met his eyes. She was trembling, but not with fear. With rage. "I don't know where he is, and even if I did, I wouldn't give him to you." The man raised his gun, and that's when it happened. A sound from the trees. A shot. Then another. One of the men dropped. Then chaos. Elias burst from the tree line like the mountain itself had spit him out. Snow clung to his coat, his face wild with fire. He moved with precision, fast, brutal. Another shot. The second rider fell, blood spilling into the snow. The third one ran. Cowards always do. Claire gasped, still on her knees as Elias rushed to her, grabbing her arms, his voice hoarse. "You okay?" She nodded, eyes wide. "You came back." He looked down at her like she was the only thing that had ever mattered. "I never really left." Blood ran down his arm. Claire reached for it, but he stopped her. "Later," he said. "We don't have much time." They burned the wanted poster that night, right there in the fireplace. Watched it curl and blacken and vanish in the smoke. Claire sat close to him, her hand wrapped in his. "You could still run," she whispered. "We could both go." Elias shook his head. I'm tired of running. Then what do? We stay. But the law? I'll speak the truth. About my brother. About what happened. If they hang me, so be it. But I won't hide from you any more. Claire felt the tears before they fell. You'd do that? For me? He looked at her. Really looked. No, he said, I'd do it for us. She buried her face in his chest. And there, surrounded by flickering shadows and the scent of pine smoke and iron, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. They say love like that doesn't last out here. That the West doesn't make room for soft hearts and second chances. But I've lived long enough to know the truth. Sometimes, in the harshest corners of the world, love grows like moss on stone. Slow, quiet, and stronger than anything trying to break it. Elias stood before a judge 6 weeks later. Told the truth. Every word. The town watched in silence as the burden he carried lifted with every breath. He wasn't hanged. He was pardoned. His brother, long dead, couldn't speak for him. But Claire did. She stood beside him, hand in his, and said the one thing that mattered. I believe him. Now, when the snow falls at Widow Creek, you can still hear whispers, not from the dead, but from the living. From a man and a woman who chose love over fear, honor over silence, and each other over everything else. Because sometimes, when the fire burns low and you're listening close, you can still hear them in the wind.